I was 10 when I lost both my parents in a crash that made the local news for 2 days, and then vanished. What no one reported was what happened next. How Michael Jackson paid for my entire childhood, stayed in my life for 14 years, and never asked for a word in return. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October 1995. I still hear that ringtone sometimes. My grandmother picked up in the kitchen. I was already in bed, but I heard her voice crack when she said my name. I knew before she told me. A truck ran a red light. My parents were gone before the ambulance arrived. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. My grandmother's hands shook so hard she couldn't hold the cup of water the nurse brought her. I didn't cry. I couldn't. All I could think was, what happens to me now? I moved in with her 3 days later. Her house sat on the edge of town, porch sagging, paint peeled years ago. Inside, the floorboards creaked with every step. It smelled like old lavender soap. She was 73. Her pension barely covered groceries. At night, I'd press my ear to the wall, listening for her soft snoring in the next room. Proof she was still there. Proof I wasn't completely alone. The bills arrived fast. Funeral costs, hospital fees. Every night I'd hear the scrape of her chair against the linoleum floor as she sat at the kitchen table. The calculator beeped softly with each number, then silence, then crying. 3 weeks after the accident, the phone rang. It was mid-morning. I was eating cereal. My grandmother answered. Her face changed. She didn't say much, just yes and thank you. But when she hung up, she sat down hard. Her hands were trembling. The funeral home had just called. Someone had paid the entire balance. Overnight. No explanation. She stared at me. I stared back. Neither of us understood. A week later, the hospital called. Same thing. Every bill. Cleared. No name. Just a confirmation number. That was the moment I started to believe someone was watching over us. Then, a few months later, a letter arrived from a law office. Inside was a check for my school tuition. A private benefactor had established an education fund in my name. All expenses would be handled. Books, uniforms, everything. My grandmother read the letter 3 times, her lips moving silently. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "Who would do this?" she whispered. I didn't know. But for the first time since the accident, I felt something other than fear. I went to school that fall in new clothes, new notebooks, a backpack without holes. The other kids didn't stare at me with pity anymore. I wasn't the orphan kid. I was just Robert. But at night, lying in that creaky bed, I'd wonder, who are you? And why me? The first time I heard his voice, I was 12 years old. Late Saturday afternoon. My grandmother handed me the phone, looking confused. "Someone wants to talk to you," she whispered. I took the phone. A man's voice came through, soft, careful, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Robert," he said, "how are you doing?" My heart pounded. I didn't know what to say. He asked about school, about soccer, about my grandmother. He didn't rush me. He just listened, really listened. When I told him I'd made the team, he sounded genuinely happy. When I mentioned my grandmother's arthritis, he said he'd make sure she got help. He didn't say his name. But sometimes, when he paused to think, I'd hear him humming, just a few notes, barely audible. Later, I realized it was human nature. He hummed it every time. The calls kept coming, always brief, always focused. He'd ask one question, then listen like my answer was the most important thing in the world. He sent books I'd mentioned. When I broke my wrist playing basketball in 8th grade, the hospital called my grandmother to say the bill had been covered before we even left. When our car broke down, a check arrived with a note, for transportation. I started keeping a journal. I wrote about the calls, about the strange, quiet comfort of knowing someone cared. I wrote about the guilt, wondering why I deserved this when so many other kids had nothing. But mostly, I wrote about hope. For the first time since my parents died, I believed my future could be more than survival. I was 14 when I finally asked my grandmother if she knew who was calling. She sat me down at the kitchen table, folded her hands. She'd been told, years ago, that the man helping us was someone very private, someone famous, someone who wanted to remain anonymous. But she thought I was old enough to know. "Michael Jackson," she said. I laughed. I thought she was confused. But she pulled out a folder, letters from his legal team, receipts with his name typed in black ink, documentation going back to 1995, every payment, every call. It was all him. My eyes went tight. I stared at those papers, his name, over and over, and I couldn't breathe. Michael Jackson. The Michael Jackson. And he'd been there, on the other end of the phone, asking me about soccer practice. The next time he called, I asked him. My voice shook. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. Then he spoke, very quietly. "Because you matter, Robert. Because no child should grow up believing they're alone. Because I can help, and so I will." That was it. No grand speech. Just the simplest, most honest truth I'd ever heard. From that point on, everything changed. I knew who he was. He knew I knew. And somehow that made it easier. He started telling me stories about his own childhood, about pressure, about loneliness, about carrying the weight of the world's expectations before you're old enough to understand them. He told me something I'll never forget. He said that kindness doesn't need an audience, that the best things we do are the ones no one ever sees. He said he'd learned that lesson late, but he wanted me to know it early. I carried that with me. When I turned 16, he arranged for me to visit a recording studio in Los Angeles. He wasn't there that day, but his team was. They treated me like I mattered, like I wasn't just some charity case. They showed me how music was built, how art could come from nothing. I called him afterward. I could barely get the words out. "Thank you," I said. He laughed. This warm, genuine sound that made me smile even through the phone. "You're going to do great things, Robert. I'm just making sure you get the chance." My grandmother passed away during my sophomore year of college. She died in her sleep, in a house that was warm and paid for. I called Michael the next day. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, holding the phone, trying not to break. He stayed on the line with me for over an hour. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He just let me grieve. A week later, he covered her funeral. He sent flowers with a handwritten note. "She raised a good man. I'm honored to have known her through you." I graduated college in 2007. Michael called the night before my ceremony. He said he was proud of me. He said my parents would have been proud too. His voice cracked. "I'd never heard him emotional before. I wish I could be there," he said. "You already are," I told him. After graduation, I moved to Los Angeles for work. Michael helped me find an apartment. He connected me with mentors. He introduced me to people who taught me how to think like an entrepreneur. He never took credit. He just opened doors and stepped back. In early 2009, I got a call from him. He sounded tired. His voice was quieter than usual. He told me he was working on a comeback tour. He was excited, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. "Are you okay?" I asked. There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background. Sometimes, faintly, that humming again. Human nature, like always. "I'm fine," he said. "Just busy." We talked for a while. He asked about my plans to start my own company. He said he'd help however he could. That was the last time I spoke to him. It was May 2009. 1 month later, he was gone. I found out at work. Someone turned on the television in the break room. I saw his face. I saw the word "deceased" scroll across the bottom of the screen. I walked out of the building. I sat in my car and sobbed. The kind of crying where you can't catch your breath, where your whole body shakes. The man who'd saved me was gone, and I'd never told him what he really meant to me. The funeral was private. I wasn't invited. I understood. But I watched the memorial service on television with millions of others, and I cried the way I hadn't cried since my parents died, because I'd lost the one person who made me believe I could be more than my circumstances. A week later, his lawyer called. Michael had left instructions. There was a final gift, enough to help me start the business I'd been planning. The note said, "Build something good. Make me proud." I used that money to launch my company in 2010. We employ over 40 people now. Every year, on the anniversary of my parents' death, I fund scholarships for kids who've lost their families. I do it quietly. No announcements. No press. Just the way he taught me. I'm 40 now. I have a wife, a son. My son is 10, the same age I was when I lost everything. Last week he asked me about the framed photo on my desk. It's the only picture I have of Michael Jackson. It's not a famous shot. It's just a candid image I found years after he died. He's looking off to the side, smiling softly, like he's listening to something only he can hear. "Who's that?" my son asked. I knelt down beside him. I looked at that photo, and I felt the same tightness in my chest I'd felt at 14, staring at those legal documents. "That's the man who saved my life," I said. He didn't have to. He just did, and looked up at me. His eyes, so much like my mother's, were wide and curious. "Did you ever thank him?" he asked. I shook my head. Not the way I should have. But I'm trying to. Every single day. In every choice I make. In every person I help. In every moment I choose to show up for someone who has no one else. Because Michael Jackson taught me that kindness doesn't need applause. It doesn't need recognition. It just needs to exist. He gave me a life I wouldn't have had. He stayed with me for 14 years. He called. He listened. He cared. Like and subscribe if you believe one person can change everything, because he proved to me that they can. He never asked for anything in return.